Have you ever stopped to think that no one's coming to save you? That there's no manual, no fixed essence, no right path, and that everything, absolutely everything you do, is your choice? It might sound freeing, but that's exactly where the weight comes in. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the most powerful philosophers of the 20th century, didn't come to comfort anyone. He came to pull the rug out from under you and say, "You are condemned to be free." Condemned because there's no escape. Free because every moment you are deciding who you are. Even when you think you're not choosing, that's already a choice. In this video, you'll discover 20 brutal philosophical ideas from Sartre that will push you out of your comfort zone. We'll talk about freedom, responsibility, anxiety, bad faith, and loneliness, not as abstract ideas, but as things you already live with, even if you don't realize it. If you've got the courage to face the raw truth of existence, stick with me, because existentialism isn't just a theory, it's a mirror. Jean-Paul Sartre's most famous line, "Man is condemned to be free," isn't a celebration of autonomy or some romantic idea of freedom. It's a harsh, brutal truth. Sartre didn't write it to inspire. He wrote it as a cold, inescapable fact. And that's exactly why it hits so hard, because it tells us there's no escaping ourselves. In Sartre's Existentialism, freedom isn't a victory, a civil right, or a spiritual reward. It's our ontological condition, something we are by definition, just because we exist as human beings. Unlike a rock, an animal, or an angel, humans are the only beings who, by simply existing, are forced to decide who they'll become. And that choice? It's not optional. Sartre explains that existence precedes essence. That means we're born first, and only later define ourselves through our actions. There's no guidebook, no pre-written soul, no divine blueprint. We're thrown into the world without explanation, and we're left to invent ourselves. This freedom feels like a sentence because there's no way out. Even when we choose not to choose, we're still choosing. Even when we pretend we're not responsible, we are. For Sartre, even silence is a choice. Doing nothing is still doing something. Imagine standing on a stage, under a spotlight, with no one in the audience. You have to act, create your character, with no script, no director, and no audience, just you and the empty space. That's Sartre's metaphor for human existence. We are the writers, actors, and directors of our own lives, even if we don't want to be. And that's where the abyss lies, in the total absence of excuses. Sartre says we can't hide behind God, biology, society, family, or circumstance. Those things influence us, sure, but they don't completely define us. There's always a moment, however small, when the choice is ours. And if the choice is ours, so is the responsibility. As he wrote in Existentialism is a humanism. Man is responsible for what he is. That idea can be freeing, but it's also terrifying, because it forces us to look in the mirror and admit that there's no one else to blame. If we fail, if we betray someone, if we abandon our dreams, it's on us. In that way, freedom becomes an unbearable weight. Often, we'd rather be victims of something outside of ourselves than admit we're the ones behind the wheel, even if we don't know how to drive. That's why Sartre uses the word condemned. He could have said, blessed to be free, or destined for freedom, but instead he chose condemned. Because for him, freedom is unavoidable, uncontrollable, and non-transferable, and that causes anguish. Anguish is the feeling of recognizing your own freedom. It's not fear of something specific. It's that inner emptiness, that discomfort that comes when you realize everything is up to you. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you can jump or step back. The fear isn't of falling, it's of knowing that you could. That's why so many people run from freedom. They adopt fixed roles, rigid rules, ready-made ideologies. They'd rather be obedient than risk being free. They build myths, traditions, dogmas, even destinies, just to avoid the truth. that they're in control, even if they don't know where they're going. Sartre calls this escape bad faith, in French mauvaise foi, and we do it all the time. We pretend we don't know what we want. We say we don't have a choice. We hide behind obligations, social norms, or how things are. But deep down, we know there's always a sliver of choice. There's always freedom, and it watches us, silently, waiting for our next move. Being free for Sartre isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about being responsible for everything you do with what's been done to you. You may have been born poor, rich, with trauma, with privilege. None of that defines your essence. What defines you is what you do with it. It's hard, it's heavy, but it's also an opportunity. When you accept this condemnation, when you stop fighting your freedom and start owning it, something changes. You stop looking for excuses and start searching for meaning. And since there's no ready-made meaning, you create your own. You choose to love, even knowing love can end. You choose to be honest, even when the world is corrupt. You choose to keep going, even when everything screams at you to quit. Choosing, in a world without a manual, is a radical act of creation. That's why Sartre believed freedom is what makes us human. We are what we do with what happens to us. And as he put it in one of his most powerful lines, in choosing for himself, he chooses for all men. So freedom isn't just personal, it's collective. Your actions shape the world. Your choices influence others. When you commit to your freedom, you're also committing to the freedom of others. That idea might scare us, and it should, but it can also wake us up. Because once we accept that we're condemned to be free, we also realize that we have the power to turn our lives into something conscious, imperfect, and brave. For most people, anguish is something to avoid, an uncomfortable feeling, a kind of unease we try to silence with distractions, medication, or quick answers. But for Jean-Paul Sartre, this kind of anguish is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of clarity. It shows up when something deeper comes to light, our radical freedom. And even more than that, the realization that nothing in this world decides for us who we must be or what we must do. Sartre says that anguish isn't like fear. We feel fear when there's a threat. But anguish appears when we look inward and realize that we're the only ones responsible for our choices. It's not fear of what might happen. It's the weight of knowing that what happens depends, in part, on us. He gives a simple but powerful example. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. You look down, feel the wind, and notice how unstable the ground is. Fear is natural, the fear of falling. But anguish is something else. It's that strange, unsettling feeling that nothing is really stopping you from jumping. You have the power to choose. There are no ropes, no fences, no destiny pulling the strings. If you fall, it's because you chose to jump. That's what makes anguish so intense. Realizing that your freedom is real, irreversible, and impossible to escape. This realization is both the heaviest burden and the greatest power of being human. Because contrary to what many think, anguish isn't about confusion. It's the deep understanding that there's no pre-made path. We're the ones who have to create it, step by step, without guarantees, and without a manual. And that's terrifying. From a young age, we're taught to seek safety. In our parents' advice, in religious teachings, in society's rules. But Sartre breaks away from all of that. He invites us to look at life without metaphysical crutches. And when all those external certainties are stripped away, what's left? Just us, alone with our freedom. But this freedom isn't meaningless. It demands action. We are, as Sartre says, condemned to be free. And that condemnation brings anguish as a constant companion. Because every choice we make, or don't make, is ours. And as the creators of our path, there's no one left to blame but ourselves. That's why anguish matters so much. It shows us that we are the absolute authors of our actions. We can't blame destiny, or karma, or human nature. Sure, we're influenced by our culture, our upbringing, our instincts, but we're never fully controlled by them. There's always a sliver of freedom, a space for decision, and it's in that space that anguish is born. Sartre wrote in Being and Nothingness, "Anguish is the dizziness of freedom." It's what we feel when we look out at the endless possibilities and realize no one else is going to choose for us. Life is a blank canvas, and each of our actions is a brushstroke. Anguish is what we feel when we understand that we're the artist and also the one responsible for the final painting. But there's something powerful hidden inside this anguish. It's a form of awakening. When we feel that existential weight, we're not collapsing. We're facing the truth. It's the opposite of being numb. It's the moment when our awareness lights up and says, "You're alive." And from this moment on, everything you do is fully your responsibility. So anguish isn't a problem to fix, it's a truth to embrace. It shows us we're not gears in a machine or characters trapped in a cosmic script. We're free authors. And that brings us face to face with the heart of existentialism. You are not what the world has made you. You are what you do with what the world has made of you. Once we understand that, we stop chasing outside answers. We realize our life is an unfinished project, and each day is a blank page. Anguish isn't the end. It's the beginning of autonomy. It breaks the cycle of passivity and pushes us toward action. Of course, not everyone can handle this kind of freedom. Sartre knew that. Many people would rather live in bad faith, lying to themselves, pretending they don't have a choice. They say, "I had no other option. It was fate. Life's just like that." But deep down, it's fear. Fear of facing their anguish and realizing that it's telling the truth. Why does this matter so much? Because only when we recognize our freedom and the anguish that comes with it, can we start living authentically. Authenticity doesn't mean following someone else's idea of the good life. It means choosing consciously, owning the consequences, and not running from ourselves. Sartre challenges us to live without guarantees. That doesn't mean living in chaos. It means accepting that life is a constant act of creation, and that every choice we make shapes not just how others see us, but how we see ourselves. Anguish, in that sense, is a constant reminder that we are alive, free, and responsible. And even though it hurts, it also sets us free, because it forces us to leave our comfort zones and face the truth. There's no pre-written essence, no fixed role. We are freedom in the flesh. For Jean-Paul Sartre, human responsibility is absolute. No shortcuts, no crutches, no excuses. If you're looking for someone to blame for your life, your unhappiness, your failures, your bad choices, existentialism won't give you comfort. Quite the opposite. It will look you in the eye and say, with cold clarity, you are responsible for everything you are. This might be one of the most radical and uncomfortable ideas in existentialist philosophy, because it strips away all the layers we use to justify our actions or lack of action. Sartre doesn't let you blame the past, your trauma, society, your parents, your zodiac sign, the government, not even human nature. The responsibility is yours, completely. At the heart of existentialism is the idea that existence comes before essence. This means we aren't born with a fixed purpose or a given identity. We're born as open projects, and we build ourselves through the choices we make. So there's no such thing as human nature to fall back on. Nothing essential determines who you will become. Everything happens in the lived experience, in the everyday decisions you make. Sartre wrote in Existentialism is a humanism. Man is, before anything else, a project which he lives out subjectively. And if you're a project, then you're also the architect, the builder, the one responsible for each brick in the structure. You can't outsource that job. You might try, you might say, that's just the way things are, or everyone does it, or I didn't have a choice. But Sartre will remind you, even not choosing is still a choice. That's the core of his philosophy. You're always choosing, even when you do nothing, even when you say I can't, even when you pretend you're being forced. And that's why there are no excuses. A lot of people try to escape this burden by leaning on the idea of fate. They believe everything is already written, that some higher plan is guiding their life. And yes, that can feel comforting. But to Sartre, that's bad faith, lying to yourself to avoid the anxiety that comes with true freedom. If everything is predestined, then you don't have to take responsibility. You can just go with the flow. But existentialism sees this as a kind of cowardice, a refusal to be the author of your own story. Sartre isn't saying we aren't influenced by things. Of course we are. By our childhoods, our culture, our experiences. But he insists that even in all that, we still have freedom. There is always space between what happens to us and what we do with it. And that space is where total responsibility begins. Let's take a real-world example. Say someone grew up in a violent environment with little opportunity. They had a rough life, and as an adult, they end up hurting others. Most people would say they're just a product of their environment. Sartre wouldn't deny the impact of their circumstances, but he'd say that doesn't excuse what they did. Because even in pain, even in trauma, freedom still exists, and with it, responsibility. That might sound harsh, and maybe it is, but it's also a call to maturity. Instead of living like victims of invisible forces, existentialism asks us to become conscious beings, aware of our own freedom. We're not leaves blown around by the wind. We are the wind. The truth is, total responsibility scares us because it offers no excuses and no promises. It just tells you, you're here, you're alive, you're aware, and every step you take is shaping who you are. If you lie, you become a liar. If you run away, you become a coward. If you choose to love, you become someone who loves, not because it's in your nature, but because you chose it. That's the big difference between existentialism and other philosophies that believe in a fixed human nature. For Sartre, you are nothing except what you do. And that might be terrifying. But it's also freeing, because if there are no excuses, then there are also no chains. If you're responsible for your life, then you can change it. You don't have to repeat the patterns you inherited. You're not stuck in a pre-written identity. You can rebuild, reinvent, remake yourself, because freedom is always alive, in every moment. Of course, this kind of thinking takes courage. Taking full responsibility isn't easy. Facing your freedom without trying to cover it up with talk of fate or destiny takes strength. But that's Sartre's challenge, to be strong enough to live authentically, and more than that, to realize that our choices don't just affect us. By choosing for himself, man chooses for all men. This quote reminds us that we are examples, influences, reflections of each other. Every personal action shapes the collective. Every choice helps define the kind of humanity we're building. So if there are no excuses, there's no neutrality either. To live is to take a stand. To act is to position yourself. And even staying silent is still a form of action. In a world where people constantly look for someone else to blame, where ready-made speeches hide personal responsibility, where failure is always someone else's fault, Sartre confronts us with a hard truth. It doesn't matter what they did to you. What matters is what you do with it. One of the most powerful and uncomfortable concepts in Jean-Paul Sartre's Existentialism is bad faith, mauvaise foi in French. But he's not talking about lies we tell others. He's talking about the lies we tell ourselves. Not to fool people around us, but to avoid facing what we really are inside. Free, responsible human beings with no excuses. Sartre defines bad faith as the act of running from freedom by consciously lying to yourself. It's when, deep down, you know you're making a choice, but you pretend you're not. You tell yourself you had no other option, that life just works this way, that your hands were tied. You act like you didn't choose, when really, you turned away on purpose. So bad faith is more than just denial. It's like a play we put on inside ourselves. And like any good play, it needs two characters, the actor and the audience, both living inside you. One part makes up the excuse, the other part goes along with it. And just like that, we keep living as if we aren't free, as if we're just victims of circumstances or pawns in a game we can't control. But Sartre doesn't let us off the hook. In bad faith, I am perfectly aware of the truth which I am hiding from myself. In other words, bad faith is a choice. It's a game of hide and seek with your own mind. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because you're not just misled, you're actively misleading yourself. Picture someone who hates their job but tells themselves every day, "I can't quit, I have bills to pay, I have a family." That person knows there's another way. But they choose to believe they have no choice. It's easier to blame the routine, the system, the boss, than to face the fear of starting over. That's bad faith in action, using half-truths as a shield to avoid confronting real freedom. Sartre gives a famous example. A waiter who overacts the part of being a waiter. He's not just doing his job, he's performing it, with rehearsed gestures, a fake tone, and forced politeness. As if being a waiter is his entire identity. What's really going on? He's trying to shrink himself down to just one role, to avoid the fact that he could be something more. By doing this, the waiter is saying, "This is all I am." And in doing so, he avoids the responsibility of choosing anything different. Here's the twist. It's not society forcing that role on him. He accepts it. He could say no. He could choose a different path. But in bad faith, he settles for the role and pretends that's who he really is. Now think about your own life. How many times have you hidden behind a label? "I'm shy. That's just how I am. I've never been good at that." Maybe there's some truth in those statements. But when you use them to stop yourself from growing, from changing, that's bad faith. Because the truth is, you can change. You always can. But change is scary. Change means risk. It means owning your freedom. And that's terrifying. Bad faith is how we protect ourselves from the fear of total freedom. It's what we do when we can't handle the idea that nothing is truly holding us back, and that the weight of our lives is on us. Why do we do this? Because real freedom brings anxiety. It forces us out of the comfort of ready-made roles. It makes us create something new. And creating takes effort, courage, and responsibility. It's easier to say, "I can't." It's more comfortable to say, "It's not up to me." But every time we do that, we lose a little bit of ourselves. Every excuse, every self-lie, is one step further from living honestly. We start going through the motions. We become machines. And then we wonder why we feel empty. Bad faith doesn't scream. It whispers. It keeps you from owning your life and convinces you that's okay. Sartre believed bad faith is everywhere. It's not rare. It's the norm. We're surrounded by social rules, expectations, definitions of success, ideas of how we should act, and we end up playing roles instead of living with honesty. But that doesn't mean we're doomed to live in bad faith. It means we need to stay alert, always. Fighting self-deception is a daily challenge. It takes courage to look in the mirror and ask, "Am I being honest with myself? Am I hiding behind something? Is this really my choice, or just an escape in disguise?" Brutal honesty with yourself is the first step toward living more authentically. It's when you stop saying, "I can't," and start saying, "I don't want to." It's admitting you chose to stay, even though you could have left. It's facing the fact that you're where you are, because in the end, you decided to be there. And yeah, that might hurt, but it's also freeing, because when you stop lying to yourself, you finally start finding yourself. When you take off the masks, you uncover something real, something honest, something deeply human, the actual possibility of becoming who you want to be. Bad faith is the curtain. Freedom is the truth behind it. But to see it, you have to be brave enough to lift the curtain and face what's there. You, raw, vulnerable, but free. At the heart of Sartre's existentialism beats a simple, yet deeply unsettling idea. God doesn't exist. But more than a theological claim, this is a philosophical, ethical, and existential statement. And it comes with a devastating consequence. If there's no God, then there are no absolute foundations, no given meaning, no objective morality, no predetermined path, just us, naked, self-aware, and free, staring into the void. And that's when the question arises. If God doesn't exist, does that mean everything is permitted? A question often linked to Dostoevsky, but Sartre reframes it with a different tone. If God doesn't exist, then man is completely free, and that freedom is absurd. What does that mean? It means that without a divine figure to define what's right or wrong, good or evil, or even what it means to be human, there's no universal manual telling us what to do, no cosmic rulebook, no eternal answers waiting to be found. The universe is silent and indifferent, and we are the ones who must give it meaning. This lack of foundations is what Sartre calls the absurd, the disconnect between the human longing for absolute meaning and the brutal reality that none exists. So, what's left when you remove God from the picture? What's left is freedom. But it's raw, dizzying freedom, with no guidance. Humans are left to invent their own values, to make decisions without leaning on any higher authority. As Sartre says in Existentialism is a humanism, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. In other words, you're not born with a purpose, you build it. And that process is lonely, anxious, and deeply personal. This vision scares many people, because if there are no universal values, what's to stop someone from being cruel, selfish, or destructive? Sartre's answer, nothing, stops you. But nothing excuses you either. And that's exactly why you carry full responsibility. If you lie, betray, or kill, that's on you. There's no higher force that made you do it. No instinct that programmed you. No original sin to blame. You're free to do anything, but responsible for everything. And that's the tension between freedom and the absurd. Freedom without a foundation is like being lost at sea with no compass, no map, no land in sight. And yet, you still have to row. No one's rowing for you. There's no divine judge watching. But every stroke of the oar is yours. Every direction you take is an ethical decision. This is where freedom stops being a nice idea and becomes a real existential burden. Because being free in a godless world doesn't mean chaos. It means moral creation. It's not about doing whatever you want. It's about recognizing that no one else has the authority to tell you what's right. You're the one who writes your own rules, and your choices don't just shape who you are. They shape the kind of humanity you're helping to build. Sartre believed that when a person chooses, they're choosing for all of humanity. Every personal value you live by sends a message. This is a value worth living by, not just for me, but for everyone. That's why existential freedom comes hand in hand with universal responsibility. And that weight, not fear of God, is what keeps us from falling into barbarity. Despite what critics think, atheistic existentialism isn't about chaos. It just refuses to pretend that order comes from above. Instead, it sees that order must come from within. It's up to each human being, fully aware of their freedom and their anxiety, to invent meaning. And that process, painful, yes, but also authentic. The absence of God isn't a call to destroy, it's a challenge to create. With no eternal foundation to fall back on, everything depends on us, our lived ethics, our actions, our commitment to the world. Sartre knew this vision was terrifying. It takes away your safety net. It smashes your idols. It demands courage, but it also sets you free because it forces you to stop waiting, to stop looking for salvation, to take ownership of your own existence, to create meaning, not because you have to, but because you choose to. For Sartre, living without God means living in abandonment. But that abandonment isn't despair, it's maturity. It's looking out at the silence of the world and saying, there's nothing here except what I decide to make of it. In that moment, you stop being a creature and become a creator. You stop following ready-made values and start living values you build through action. You give up the illusion of guaranteed meaning and begin creating meaning with your own hands. That's the radical message of atheistic existentialism. It doesn't offer comfort, it offers an awakening. And in the middle of all the absurdity, it quietly whispers, you are free. Anything is possible, but everything depends on you. You're alone in a room, acting naturally, maybe dancing, talking to yourself, thinking out loud, just being completely you. Then, suddenly, the door creaks. You turn your head and realize someone was watching. In that instant, everything changes. You straighten up, adjust your posture, feel embarrassed. That small, almost invisible moment is one of the most powerful scenes to understand what Sartre calls the threat that the other poses to our freedom. In his most complex work, Being and Nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre dives deep into a deeply human experience, how someone else's gaze affects who we are. For existentialism, the human being is pure freedom, no fixed essence, always evolving, always becoming something new. But that free and intimate process gets disrupted the moment we realize we're being watched. The gaze of the other transforms us, not because they tell us who we are, but because we feel pressured to become whatever they see. Sartre explains, the gaze of the other objectifies me. It turns me from a subject into an object. Until that moment, I was just awareness in action, spontaneous, fluid, open. But their gaze freezes me. It creates an image of me that's outside my control. I start to see myself through their eyes, and worse, I start to fear that I am only what they see. That's where the tension begins. On one side, there's my freedom, the right to reinvent myself at any moment, to escape fixed labels, to never be just one thing. On the other side, there's the other person, with their judgment, expectations, and power to label, shrink, or trap me in an identity. Sartre calls this objectification. It's when I stop being a free subject and become an object, a character, a type, a label, under someone else's gaze. Think about how many times you've shaped yourself just because someone else was present. At a job interview, on a first date, at a family gathering. You change your tone, pick safer words, pretend to be more confident than you are. Why? Because someone else's gaze makes you perform. It pushes you to fit into an idea, to seem like someone, even if it's not really you. And in that performance, you feel your freedom being threatened. But here's the thing. Sartre isn't saying other people are trying to enslave us. The gaze isn't always mean or intentional. It's just unavoidable. Living in society means being exposed. And being exposed means constantly standing in front of mirrors. Mirrors that reflect back partial images of who we are. So the real question becomes, what do we do with that? Most of the time, we adapt. We start living according to how others see us. If they expect us to be strong, we hide our vulnerability. If they expect us to be logical, we suppress our emotions. If they expect submission, we silence our will. And little by little, we shrink ourselves to fit into other people's projections, as if we're only what others recognize in us. Sartre calls this trap an inauthentic life, a life where we're no longer the author of our own story, just an actor reading lines from a script we didn't write. And the worst part? Most of the time, we don't even notice it's happening. But Sartre also admits we can't escape others. There's no way to live completely outside of people's gaze. So the answer isn't to hide. It's to reclaim your freedom, even while being seen. That means resisting the urge to fit in. It means staying open-ended, It means refusing to be trapped by expectations. This kind of resistance takes awareness, and it takes courage to say, "You see me a certain way, but I'm more than that. You're labeling me, but I'm still free. You want me to stay fixed, but I choose to evolve." And here again, we feel the beauty and pain of Sartrean freedom. It's not just the freedom to do whatever you want, it's the freedom to refuse being reduced to a fixed identity, even when everyone else is trying to box you in. This tension is always there. It happens in friendships, in love, at work, in art, in religion. It shows up when you feel pressured to be someone you didn't choose to be, or when you feel stuck, like people already expect you to stay the same forever. But Sartre challenges us. You are always more than what others see, even when they say otherwise, even when they look at you with judgment, admiration, envy, or indifference. You are still freedom. Of course, there's a cost. Living freely among others is risky. You'll face judgment. You'll disappoint expectations. You'll have to carry the weight of being misunderstood. But it's the only way to live authentically, to look at yourself and say, "I am not just what others expect of me. I am what I choose to be, even when I'm being watched." Once again, existentialism calls us to maturity, to responsibility, to resistance, not resistance against other people, but resistance against the invisible power their gaze has over our freedom. Sartre never said it would be easy, but he believed there's only real meaning in life when we choose to stay free, even when everyone else wants us to fit in. Imagine a Parisian cafe in the mid-20th century. The tables are full, the smell of fresh coffee fills the air, and among the rushed customers and quiet conversations, a waiter moves with almost theatrical precision. His steps seem rehearsed, his gestures exaggerated, his posture carefully tilted, and his words sound like memorized lines. He's not just working as a waiter. It looks like he's performing what he thinks a waiter should be. This is Sartre's famous example from Being and Nothingness. It's one of the clearest and most symbolic moments in his philosophy, used to show how, in everyday life, we hide from our freedom through what he calls bad faith. To Sartre, the cafe waiter isn't just doing his job. He's playing a role, overacting, behaving as if he is by nature a waiter. But no one is essentially anything, and that's where bad faith begins. Sartre argues that human beings don't have a fixed, predefined essence. We're not this or that by nature. We are freedom. We're an open project. We can be a waiter today, and a painter, a teacher, or a traveler tomorrow. But when someone clings to a role and turns it into their full identity, they're running away from the freedom to be more. That's the core of bad faith. Acting as if we're not free. Acting as if we're stuck in a role. Acting as if our identity is something fixed and final. The waiter performs, not just out of politeness or professionalism, but because it protects him from the anxiety of being free. It's easier to play a ready-made role than to create yourself from scratch every day. Sartre writes, he is playing at being a waiter, amusing himself with it. He knows what he is, or at least pretends to. And that's the key. He pretends. He pretends that's all he is. He pretends he couldn't be anything else. He pretends that this is his place, his truth, his nature. And by doing that, he lies to himself. That self-deception, silent, constant, and often unnoticed, is bad faith in everyday life. And it's everywhere. It's in the doctor who thinks their whole identity is the white coat, in the mother who believes she only exists as a mum, never as a woman, in the employee who believes they were born to follow orders, in the artist who thinks they must suffer to create. It's in how we confuse the roles we play with who we really are, and by doing that, we lock ourselves into masks we've chosen to wear. Bad faith feels safe. It protects us from the overwhelming vastness of freedom. If you believe this is just how I am, or I was born for this, or this is all I know, then you don't need to change. You don't need to face hard choices. You don't need to take the risk of trying something new, but you're also not living authentically. You become just another cog in the machine, a walking label, a character reading lines written by someone else. And the saddest part, you forget that you could have been more. Sartre isn't criticizing waiters or saying it's wrong to play social roles. What he's calling out is when the role replaces the self, when we stop being in a role and start being nothing but that role. So bad faith isn't just about lying, it's about giving up on freedom, giving up on possibility, giving up on yourself. But here's the strange thing about Sartre's example. The waiter knows. He senses that he's exaggerating. He feels, even if only subconsciously, that he's pretending. That's why Sartre says bad faith is a kind of game we play with our own awareness. We know we're pretending, but we keep pretending because it's easier than facing the burden of freedom. And that's a powerful lesson for our daily lives. How many times a week do you tell yourself, that's just how I am, I can't change, this is my role? How often do you act not because you chose to, but because it's what people expect from you? How often do you act more like a character than someone who's constantly evolving? Bad faith isn't just in the overacting waiter, it's in the little things, in fake smiles, in roles we play to please, to fit in, to survive. The way out of bad faith isn't to abandon everything or run away from society. It's to stay aware. It's to remember every day that you are not your role. You're in it, you're playing it, but you can change it anytime you want. The authentic life, for Sartre, is one where we don't let ourselves get stuck. It's a life where we keep the awareness alive that we're free, even inside the roles we play. You can be a waiter, a lawyer, a mother, a leader, a student, whatever you want. But never let that completely define who you are, because the moment you believe you're only the thing you're representing, you stop being free. You fall into bad faith, and you step away from what makes human life so difficult and so beautiful, the constant possibility of beginning again. If there's no God, no built-in human nature, no cosmic manual telling us what's right or wrong, then who decides what matters? For Jean-Paul Sartre, the answer is clear and overwhelming. We do. In Existentialism, human beings are thrown into the world without a script. There's no human nature telling us how to live. There's no essence before existence. We exist first, and only then do we create who we are. That's why, for Sartre, freedom is an act of creation. It's not just the freedom to do whatever you want. It's the freedom to give meaning to a world that starts off empty. It's not enough to simply live. You have to choose to live with meaning. And since there are no eternal values waiting for us, it's up to each person to invent their own moral compass, their priorities, and their purpose. This is the hardest part of freedom. It gives you everything, but hands you nothing ready-made. Sartre wrote in, "Existentialism is a humanism. By choosing for himself, man chooses for all mankind." That sentence carries deep ethical weight, because when you choose how to live, you're also saying, this is a value I believe is worthy for any human being. It's not about forcing your rules on others. It's about living your choices in a way that shows their value. You're always saying, even without words, I chose this, and I accept the responsibility for that choice in front of the world. This is the double edge of existentialist freedom. It's a burden, and it's a power. A burden because no one can tell you what's right for you. A power because no one can take away your ability to create meaning. Many people try to escape that weight. They look for safety in traditions, ideologies, ready-made moral systems. But Sartre warns, that's bad faith. It's pretending someone else already made the choices for you. It's running from the anxiety of being free, hiding behind roles or inherited ways of living. But when you do that, you give up your freedom, and worse, you give up being yourself. To live authentically, according to Sartre, means exactly this: to stand by the values you chose for yourself, not the ones the world handed to you. And no, that doesn't mean selfishness. Sartre never supported blind individualism. where people just do whatever they want without caring about others. In fact, he believed every personal choice carries a commitment to humanity. Each value you affirm also affirms a kind of human being you believe should exist. So creating values is not a solo act. It's a deep ethical commitment. Think of someone who chooses to live with courage, even in fear. That person isn't just handling their personal struggle. They're saying, even when everything pushes me to retreat, I choose to move forward. And that choice matters, not just for me, but as proof that humans can resist. That's the real power of freedom. It turns your personal life into an existential message to the world. But what if you make a mistake? Sartre doesn't believe in perfection. He believes in awareness. Mistakes happen, contradictions show up. What matters is not being perfect. It's being responsible for your choices, even when they fail. Existentialism doesn't demand saints. It asks for people willing to live honestly with their freedom. And more than that, it invites us to revisit our values when they become empty, outdated, or inauthentic. The value you affirm today might not serve you tomorrow, and that's okay. Freedom also means the ability to rebuild your own foundation. That flexibility might feel unstable, but in truth, it's deeply human. We're not statues, we're in motion. And the values we create reflect our growth, our pain, and our learning. This idea invites us to stop chasing absolute truths and instead to live by truths born from experience, values born from lived love, from injustice felt, from honest work, from quiet reflection, from a brave choice. These are the values that, even without divine origin, hold up our human dignity. And here's the hidden beauty inside the anxiety. When you create your own values with responsibility, you're not lost, you're awake. You're not leaning on outside authority, you're relying on your own clarity. You're not following commandments, you're answering to your conscience. You're not waiting for life's meaning to fall from the sky. You're building it, brick by brick, with free hands. Sartre's freedom isn't comfortable, but it's real. And because it's real, it's the only kind that lets us live authentically and bravely. So when you ask, who's going to tell me what's right for me? Existentialism answers, you, only you. But with that answer, it also adds, and each of your choices tells the world, this is how I believe a human being should live. That's Sartre's ethics. No commandments, no absolutes, no guarantees, just the strength that comes from freedom, lived with responsibility, courage, and depth. We live in a time where it's common to hear things like, I'm like this because of how I was raised. It's genetic. My trauma defined me. That behavior runs in my DNA. These kinds of statements reflect a worldview called determinism, the idea that our actions, thoughts, and choices are direct results of forces beyond our control, biological, social, historical, or psychological. In this view, we're not causes, we're consequences. We're not active subjects, we're products of everything that came before us. But Jean-Paul Sartre saw this mindset with radical skepticism. To him, determinism is just another way of denying human freedom, a form of bad faith, where we dodge the weight of responsibility by blaming something outside ourselves. Sartre begins by rejecting the idea that humans are born with a fixed essence. We're not born with a script. There's no destiny waiting for us. We're not programmed by biology, culture, or the unconscious mind. We are, above all, freedom in action. And that's why, to Sartre, we are always more than what was done to us. One of his most powerful lines says, "What matters is not what they made of you, but what you make of what they made of you." That's where Sartre clearly breaks from determinism. He doesn't deny that things like genetics, trauma, or social context influence us. But influence is not destiny. Between what happens to us and what we do with it, there's a space. And in that space is our freedom. That's where existence becomes creation, not just repetition. Let's bring this into real life. Maybe you were born into a hostile environment with limited opportunities. Maybe you carry deep emotional wounds or difficult personality traits. Sartre would ask, okay, but now what? What are you going to do with it? Because no matter how heavy the past is, freedom still exists. Maybe it's small, maybe it's buried under pain, but it's there, waiting to be claimed. And ignoring it is a choice to remain passive. Existentialism, in this way, is a philosophy of conscious action. It refuses to accept that we're just reacting to life. It insists, even when everything seems stacked against us, we are still capable of deciding. Sartre also goes after psychological determinism, especially the idea that our unconscious mind controls everything. He believed many people use psychology to explain their choices as if they had no say in them. I cheated because I'm needy. I ran away because I'm scared of being abandoned. I can't do it because I have low self-esteem. To Sartre, those statements are just ways of avoiding the anxiety of making a conscious choice. Of course, traumas and emotional patterns are real, but when we turn them into total justifications, we're surrendering our freedom, and with it, our responsibility. Even psychological suffering, Sartre says, doesn't erase our freedom. It can make things harder, it can cloud our view, but it doesn't eliminate our ability to choose. The same goes for social determinism. Yes, we're born into a culture. Yes, we're shaped by class, race, gender, and society's structures. But Sartre reminds us, even in the worst forms of oppression, there's still a space for decision. Maybe that space is tiny, maybe it's painful, but it's real. Think of historical figures who, even under dictatorship, in prison or at war, still chose to resist, still said no, still stood by their values. That's what Sartre means. Freedom is the final word, even when all the others have been taken away. That doesn't mean he ignores pain, injustice, or how complex life is, but he refuses to believe humans are just gears in a machine. To Sartre, being human means being condemned to be free, even free to resist your own fate. So Sartrean freedom isn't some magical power. It doesn't ignore conditioning. It faces it. It says, even so, I choose. Even wounded, I act. Even conditioned, I'm still responsible. And this responsibility is at the heart of Sartre's ethics. Because when we blame DNA, the system, our upbringing, we're not just denying our freedom, we're denying our humanity. Sartre believed human dignity comes from the awareness that we are the authors of our own lives. Even when we're limited, even when we fail, even when we're conflicted, we are still free. And that might be the most uncomfortable idea in modern thought. Today, we're surrounded by scientific explanations for human behavior. Neuroscience maps our decisions. Genetics predicts our tendencies. Psychology digs into our past. But Sartre would say, none of that removes your responsibility in the present. You can understand where your fear comes from. You can recognize why you repeat certain patterns. But in the end, the question is still, what are you going to do about it now? And no one else can answer that for you. That's why existentialism can feel so uncomfortable. Because it strips away every excuse. It doesn't let you hide behind invisible forces. It demands that you stand up and choose. Sartre didn't believe in fate. He believed in projects. And every project is something we build. With freedom, with fear, and with courage. To him, a person is what they make of themselves. And that is our greatest burden, but also our greatest chance at salvation. Of all the key ideas in Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism, one stands out as its core foundation. Existence precedes essence. At first glance, it might sound abstract, even confusing, but it actually marks a radical shift in how we understand what it means to be human. Sartre wasn't just playing with words. He was challenging thousands of years of metaphysical and religious thought. He was saying loud and clear, you're not born being anything, you become. For most of history, many philosophies, especially religious or essentialist ones, believed that humans were born with a built-in essence, a human nature, a soul with purpose, a divine plan written before we even took our first breath. In that view, life was about fulfilling what was already written. You were just following a script, living out a destiny, fulfilling a purpose that defined you from the start. Sartre completely breaks with that view. To him, there is no given human nature, no pre-made idea of what we're meant to be, no blueprint for what it means to be a man, a woman, to be good, right, or true. That's why he flips the order. First, we exist. Then, we define what our existence means. You're born, and that's it. There's no instruction manual in the crib. You're thrown into the world, surrounded by chaos, freedom, fear, expectations. And right there, in that messy reality, you begin to build yourself. Existence comes first. You're alive. You're conscious. You can choose. You can mess up. You can love. You can be afraid. And from all of that, you begin to shape your essence, meaning what you decide to become. Sartre often used the example of objects to explain this. A knife, for instance, has a clear essence. It was made to cut. Its purpose came before it existed. But humans? We're not like knives. We weren't designed with a function. We weren't born with a built-in purpose waiting to be fulfilled. This lack of a predefined essence is exactly what makes us free, and also what fills us with anxiety. Because if there's no why that existed before you, there are no ready-made excuses. You can't say, that's just how I was made. You can't say, I was born to do this. You can't hide behind biology, culture, or fate. You are what you choose to be, and that's powerful, but also terrifying. Because it means you are entirely responsible for who you become. Nothing in you is fully determined, except what you do with your freedom. This idea asks us to see ourselves not as results, but as projects. A project is something that's always under construction. It can be changed, restarted, paused, or completely rebuilt. You're not a finished product. You're a work in progress, and that lasts until your very last breath. Existence precedes essence also means that no moral, religious, or psychological essence can define us all. Good and evil aren't written in the stars. Truth isn't carved in stone. All of that has to be created, chosen, and lived. And this brings us to the big ethical challenge of existentialism. If there's no fixed essence, then the values we live by don't come pre-packaged either. So who creates them? We do. You, with your daily choices. Me, with my decisions. Each of us, through our mistakes, our victories, our downfalls, and our comebacks. This way of thinking makes life something active. We're not here to find ourselves. We're here to create ourselves. Identity isn't something you discover. It's something you build. Morality isn't something revealed. It's something you commit to. And that takes courage. Because there are no guarantees. There's no essence waiting to be uncovered that you can safely follow. There's only freedom, and with it, the responsibility to create meaning from the emptiness. Sartre knew this would be unsettling for many. After all, we're raised to find comfort in certainties. Human beings are good by nature. Human beings are evil by nature. We're made to love. We were created for a purpose, but existentialism says, no, you weren't made for anything. You're here, and that's enough. Now it's up to you to decide what you're going to do about it. And that might just be the most liberating and most lonely idea in modern philosophy. Liberating because it breaks all the invisible chains. You can change. You can choose differently. You can recreate yourself as many times as you want, but lonely because no one can do it for you. There's no fate, no guru, no genetic code, no moral rulebook that can build your essence. It's yours, only yours, and it's being written every single day. That's the raw power of Sartre's thinking. You are, in the end, the author of your own life. It doesn't matter what others did to you. What matters is what you do with what they did, and that changes everything. It changes how we look at our failures. It changes how seriously we take our choices. It changes our relationship with the past. It changes how we face the future. Existence precedes essence isn't just a philosophical phrase. It's an invitation, a wake-up call, a challenge to take responsibility. Because once you understand this deeply, you can't go back. You can't hide behind easy excuses. You can't hand over your life to circumstances. You can't sit around waiting for someone to tell you who you are. You'll have to choose. You'll have to create. You'll have to exist. And then become. Being free might sound like an ideal worth chasing. Freedom inspires, empowers, and gives us the feeling that we're in control of our own lives. But Jean-Paul Sartre, with his brutally honest outlook, reminds us of something most people don't want to hear. To be free is also to be alone. To be free is to live without guarantees, without a given meaning, without a manual. To be free is to carry the weight of abandonment. In Existentialism, this state of abandonment is called ontological helplessness. It's not emotional loneliness, like feeling alone in a room. It's something deeper. The human being is alone in the task of creating their own existence. There's no God watching over us, no fate laid out ahead of time, no essence waiting to be fulfilled. We're here, thrown into the world, and everything depends on what we choose to do. And that, while liberating, is also devastating. Sartre once wrote, "Man is condemned to be free, condemned because he did not create himself, and yet is nonetheless free. Because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." That kind of total freedom leads to what he calls existential abandonment. There's no higher authority to appeal to, no one who can tell us with certainty what the right thing is, no eternal moral structure to protect us from the anxiety of choosing. We stand alone, in front of the world and in front of ourselves. This kind of abandonment isn't just a philosophical idea. You feel it in your body. You feel it in sleepless nights, in the doubts that freeze you in place, in the choices no one can make for you. You feel it when you realize there are no guarantees that you're on the right path. And yet, you have to keep walking. That's the burden of freedom. It belongs entirely to us. And that very fact, it isolates us. It pulls us away from the comfort of just following orders. It cuts us off from certainties. It takes away all the ready-made answers. How many times have you wished someone would just decide for you? That someone would say, "Go this way, do that. This is the best option." How many times have you craved a clear answer, a reliable compass, a word that would make your pain make sense? But existentialism is painfully honest. That answer doesn't exist. Sure, you can take advice. You can look for wisdom in traditions, religions, or books. But in the end, the decision is yours. The responsibility is yours. The burden is yours. That's the heart of existential helplessness. You can't hide behind anyone. And that's a kind of loneliness most people aren't ready to face. Unlike philosophies that promise salvation, comfort, or destiny, Sartre offers something else, a mirror. And in that mirror, there's no God, no essence, no universal purpose. There's only you, with your freedom, you, with your responsibility, you, with your anxiety. And as scary as that sounds, it's real. Sartre isn't here to sell illusions. He wants you to wake up. He wants you to see the world as it really is, without given meaning, but full of possibility. He wants you to understand that the lack of guarantees isn't the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of a life lived consciously. The beginning of a story that gets written day by day. The beginning of a human being who, even when abandoned in the world, has the courage to create meaning, even without knowing if it'll last. That kind of courage is what separates the authentic person from the one who lives in bad faith. The second hides behind excuses, roles, and rules. The first accepts loneliness as a starting point. And no, this loneliness doesn't mean social isolation. It means autonomy. It means the ability to look inward and say, I don't have all the answers, but I still choose. I don't know if this path is right, but it makes sense now, and I take responsibility for it. There's no ready-made meaning, but there is value in the search. Freedom without guarantees is like walking in the dark, with only a dim flashlight, building your own road as you go. No one's going to light it up for you. No one's going to pave it, but it's yours. And that's enough. In that abandonment, a deep kind of existential maturity is born. You stop waiting. You stop outsourcing your life. You stop hiding, and you start living with more responsibility, more presence, more honesty. Sartre invites us to embrace freedom, not as a romantic ideal, but as a call to conscious action. He invites us to stop chasing guarantees and start building meaning, even through pain, even in chaos, even in abandonment. And here's the paradox. The more you accept the loneliness of freedom, the closer you get to authenticity. And in authenticity, there's strength, there's clarity, there's dignity. Because in the end, there's nothing more human than creating meaning where none is given. Nothing braver than living without guarantees. And nothing freer than walking a path that isn't laid out, but still walking. But it's not just about surviving abandonment. It's about acting from that space. Sartre challenges us to stop waiting for the world to hand us meaning. He dares us to become the ones who create it, even knowing it may always be fragile, imperfect, and temporary. That kind of creation doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes it shows up in the smallest acts, when we choose to act with honesty, even when no one's watching. When we decide to love someone, even while fearing loss. When we walk a path we believe is right, even if it's a lonely one. It's in those moments that, even abandoned, we affirm our freedom with courage. So, the loneliness of being free isn't a punishment. It's the doorway to authenticity. It lets us say, I don't do this because I was told to. I do it because I chose to. I don't believe because someone said I should. I believe because I lived it. I don't act out of fear. I act out of awareness. By taking this stance, we stop being pieces in someone else's game, and we become the authors of our own story. And that changes everything, even our relationships. Because someone who accepts the loneliness of freedom also accepts that others are lonely too. They understand the other person isn't here to complete them, save them, or lead them. The other is also alone, and that calls for respect, compassion, and maturity. That's how abandonment can become a bridge. Two free individuals meeting, without caging each other. Two people who know there are no guarantees, but who still choose to walk side by side for a while. That's a kind of freedom that doesn't dominate, it invites. A freedom that doesn't demand, it welcomes. And maybe in that lies the quiet hope of existentialism. Even abandoned in this world, we can become sources of meaning for ourselves and for others. Not because we were made for it, but because we chose to be. Sartre teaches us that human greatness isn't about following some higher plan. It's about creating value, even when everything around us feels empty. In the absence of guarantees, every conscious choice is an act of courage. Every step into the unknown is an expression of freedom. And every time we embrace our abandonment and still choose to live with authenticity, we become more whole, more human, more free. There are moments in life when everything collapses. When your world falls apart, your sense of certainty disappears, and all that's left is one raw, real, unfiltered moment where you're face to face with yourself. Jean-Paul Sartre and the existentialists called these moments limit situations. These are moments when we're face to face with death, with war, with a decision we can't undo. And in those moments, something extraordinary happens. Freedom shows up in its purest, most undeniable form. Sartre believed that while we're always free, It's in extreme situations that we're forced to confront that freedom. There are no more distractions, no more masks, no more roles to play. It's just you and the need to choose. War, for example, was personal for Sartre. During World War II, he was taken prisoner by the Germans. In that prison camp, where you might think freedom didn't exist, Sartre saw the opposite. Even when your body is trapped, your mind is still free. You're free to choose how you respond, free to give in or to resist, to hate or to understand, to stay silent or to speak out. That inner freedom, untouchable by anyone, is what scares us most, because it never goes away. War, in this sense, is a brutal stage where every choice feels bigger, sharper, more real. When everything around you is broken and your life could end at any moment, every action matters. You're no longer just going through the motions. You act because you choose to, and that choice might be your last. The awareness of death forces freedom into focus. It shakes us out of our routines. It makes us realize we don't have unlimited time. And that's why each choice carries more weight, more urgency, more consequence. It's easy to live as if we'll be around forever. We put off decisions. We pretend our actions don't matter. We live like there will always be a tomorrow. But when we come face to face with death, everything changes. It reminds us that time is limited and freedom is absolute. No one can live our lives for us. And in the end, life is what we do with the time we have left. That truth is harsh, but it's also liberating. Because it wakes us up, it snaps us out of the fog and forces us to ask, if I could die tomorrow, what do I choose to do today? If nothing's guaranteed, what really matters? If everything depends on me, what do I want my life to say? Sartre encourages us to see life as a series of choices made under pressure. And in limit situations, the pressure is real. You can't avoid choosing. And not choosing, that's still a choice. That's why war, as awful as it is, reveals something essential about life. In that space, there's no room for denial. The mask falls, and who you are gets exposed, for better or worse. But you don't need a literal war to face a limit situation. There are personal wars too. The death of someone you love, a sudden illness, losing everything you thought defined you. In those moments, the world you knew disappears, and you're forced to rebuild everything from scratch, or fall apart completely. Here's the deep truth. The freedom we feel in those moments has always been inside us. It was just sleeping, buried under routine, expectations, and the roles we play. Crisis wakes it up and asks, now that everything's gone, what will you do? Who will you be? What truth will you stand for, even without any guarantees? Sartre believed that it's in that breaking point that we find our true selves, not because we find answers, but because we face life without a shield. And that kind of honesty is what makes us truly free. Not free in some fantasy way, where we can do anything, but free in the existential sense. Knowing that life is about choosing, and that to choose is to take a stand, to take ownership, to say, this is mine. In a world that gives us constant distractions, these limit situations are harsh, but necessary, reminders that life is serious, and freedom isn't light. It demands presence, it demands decision, it demands courage, and more than that, it demands we stop blaming the world, the past, or other people. Because in extreme moments, there are no more excuses. There's only you and what you do next. That's why people who've had near-death experiences often change their lives completely afterward. Not because they saw something new, but because, for the first time, they clearly saw their own freedom. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't keep living like life's just some empty loop. You can't pretend you're not free. And being free requires an answer. That answer might be a fresh start. It might be forgiveness. It might be changing course. It might mean ending a lie or starting a truth. Doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that it's yours. chosen, owned, lived. Because, as Sartre reminds us, even in the face of death, we are still free to say yes or no. And that choice is what defines who we are. For Jean-Paul Sartre, freedom isn't just a philosophical concept or an idea locked away in books. It's a living force, restless and real, that demands expression in the world. To be free, according to Sartre, isn't just a state of awareness. It's a call to action. And that's exactly why he says that freedom requires engagement. To engage means admitting that the world around us matters. It means rejecting indifference. It means recognizing that, even without guarantees, we're still responsible for the social, political, and historical structures we live in. In Sartre's Existentialism, freedom doesn't isolate us in some personal bubble. It throws us into the world, head first. And it challenges us to act, even in the face of chaos, injustice, and oppression. Throughout his life, Sartre wasn't just a theoretical philosopher. He showed up in the streets, in protests, in newspapers. He supported leftist movements, stood against colonialism, and spoke out against authoritarian regimes. For him, thinking and acting couldn't be separated. Philosophy wasn't a way to escape the world. It was a tool to change it. This mindset came straight from his belief that human beings are always a work in progress. There's no fixed essence, no pre-written role. We are what we do, and that applies not just to our private lives, but also to our place in the world. If I'm free to shape who I am, then I'm also responsible for the systems I accept, the injustices I tolerate, the oppression I ignore. Freedom, in this sense, is not neutral. It carries ethical weight. It forces me to choose and to take responsibility for those choices. Sartre wrote, "Man is the being whose existence precedes his essence. He is free, and because of that, he is responsible for everything he is." But that responsibility doesn't stop with the self. It extends outward, to others, to the community, to humanity. This is where freedom and politics connect. For Sartre, politics isn't just about parties, elections, or institutions. It's the space where our choices shape the world. It's where freedom is either expressed or denied. To ignore politics is, in his view, a form of bad faith. It's pretending we're just spectators, when really, we're participants. It's saying, "That's not my problem," when actually, everything around us is our problem too. Sartre criticized intellectuals who only lived in theory. He said thinking without acting made you complicit in suffering, that writing without commitment was a quiet form of cowardice. That's why he insisted that philosophers come down from their ivory towers, get their hands dirty in the real world, listen to the voices of the oppressed, use their platform to call things out, to resist, to propose change. This philosophy of engagement became even stronger after World War II. Sartre saw the horrors of Nazism, the silent approval of the upper class, the way language was twisted for control, and he realized something. Staying silent is also a choice. Choosing not to act is still a political act. From then on, his ideas became more radical. He started saying that neutrality is impossible, that just by living, we're already making choices, and those choices affect others. So, for Sartre, freedom and commitment are inseparable. Freedom isn't just a personal right, it's a collective duty. Here's one of Sartre's most powerful ideas. It's not enough to be free by yourself. Your freedom only becomes real when it helps make others free too. In other words, it doesn't matter if you feel free inside, if you live in a world where others are still being crushed. For freedom to be real, it has to be shared. It has to be built together. It has to be political. That's why Sartre supported the Algerian liberation movement, why he stood with the students and workers during the May 1968 protests in France, why he fought for the rights of the marginalized. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. But he never stopped believing that philosophy should be used to transform the world. And this leads us to a hard but necessary question. What are we doing with our freedom? Are we just using it to consume, to entertain ourselves, to stay comfortable? Or are we looking around and asking, how can I help others be free too? What can I do with what I have to change something around me? That's the heart of Sartre's political philosophy, to act with the awareness that our choices shape reality, to accept that the world is full of possibilities and every move we make helps define what's possible tomorrow. This doesn't mean we all have to become radical activists, but it does mean we can't pretend we're neutral. Just by living, speaking, working, buying, we're taking part in building the world. And that comes with responsibility. Sartre's engaged existentialism reminds us that being free is also a burden. Because freedom is not easy. It demands that we take a stand, that we show courage, that we stop blaming others and start doing something. And in this sense, praxis, conscious action, is the core of freedom. Thinking is important. Reflecting is essential. But action is what brings change. That's why Sartre's idea of freedom is never static. It's not something you have. It's something you practice, something you express. Every day, in every decision, in every move. And if you're not doing that, then maybe what you're calling freedom is just a comfortable illusion. Picture this. You're sitting on a park bench, looking at a tree root twisting out of the ground. Nothing unusual about it. But suddenly, the scene feels weird, almost unsettling. The root, once a natural part of the scenery, now seems absurd, pointless, meaningless. The world reveals itself, and that revelation makes you feel sick. That's exactly what happens to Antoine Roquentin, the main character in Jean-Paul Sartre's novel, Nausea. And what he feels isn't just a stomachache. It's a deep existential rejection of everything that's always been there, existence itself. Roquentin isn't sick. He's not going crazy. He's just had what Sartre calls a revelation of the absurd. He saw, with complete clarity, that the world has no built-in meaning, that things just are, no purpose, no reason, no explanation. And when the veil is lifted, when labels, routines, and roles stop covering up that emptiness, what's left is raw, uncomfortable, almost physical, nausea. In the novel, this isn't some dramatic breakdown. It's quiet, every day. Roquentin is in Bouville, a dull, fictional town where life passes without much happening. He spends time researching a historical figure. He takes walks. He observes things. But something is building inside him, a strange discomfort with no name, until it finally breaks out as a total rejection of being itself. This nausea isn't just a feeling, it's a deep philosophical experience. The realization that nothing in the world has any given meaning, that things, people, objects, everything simply exists, and that's it. There's no hidden why behind reality. For Sartre, that's the core of existentialism. Before any ideas, values, or justifications, there is existence, raw, unexplained, impossible to fully grasp. That's why Roquentin looks at the tree root and feels repulsed. The root serves no purpose. It has no logic. It just is. It exists, and that fact alone is too much to bear. Nausea, in this sense, is the emotional reaction to realizing that existence is radically unearned. There's no should be, no built-in purpose, no hidden essence behind things. That realization can be overwhelming. After all, we grow up being told everything has a meaning, that the world follows a plan, that there's a reason we're here, that everything happens for something. But Sartre tears away those illusions. He doesn't offer comfort. He throws us, like Roquentin, straight into reality, with no instruction manual. And here's the twist. Nausea is the first step toward freedom. Once all the justifications collapse, God, destiny, universal meaning, what's left? Human freedom, the ability to create meaning, to invent values, to choose, even without any guarantees. Roquentin goes through what feels like an existential purge. He loses his sense of stability. But in that emptiness, he finds something new. Existence is absurd, but it's mine. Nothing has meaning, but I can make one. This shift is the heart of existentialist philosophy. Nausea might seem like a breakdown, but it's actually a beginning. The beginning of the free person. The one who no longer accepts pre-made meanings, but realizes they can create them. Sartre takes this feeling of disgust and turns it into a path toward autonomy. Nausea pulls us out of passivity. It forces us to see that we're not stuck with any nature, any role, any fixed identity. We are free, and that's both terrifying and empowering. Of course, that kind of freedom comes with a burden. No more excuses. No more, I was made this way. No more, it's God's will. There's only you, and what you decide to do with this absurd existence. By the end of the novel, Roquentin finds a kind of release through art. He listens to a jazz song, simple, spontaneous, nothing fancy, and it moves him. In that light melody, he realizes something. Art can be a way of affirming life. Creating something is a form of resistance against the absurd. And that's a message for all of us. You don't have to be an artist to affirm life. You can do it through your actions, your words, your choices. Every moment you choose with awareness, you're responding to nausea. You're saying, yes, the world is meaningless, but I exist, and that's enough to start. So nausea isn't the end of the road. It's a gateway, a turning point. It marks the end of comforting lies and the beginning of real freedom. Many people avoid that confrontation. They prefer to live with ready-made answers. They follow the roles society hands them. They wear the masks. Sartre calls that bad faith, pretending you're not free to escape the responsibility of being free. But Roquentin, like Sartre, chooses to face the discomfort. He doesn't run from it. He walks through it. And in doing so, he invites us to do the same. Today, Roquentin's Nausea feels more relevant than ever. We're living in a time of meaning crises, information overload, and shifting identities. The feeling of absurdity is everywhere. But that's not a curse. It's a call to become the authors of our own stories, to create meaning where there is none, to affirm life, even when it doesn't seem to justify itself. With Nausea, Sartre wasn't trying to give us answers. He wanted to shake us, to wake us up, to help us see that behind all the existential nausea, there's one powerful, simple truth. Nothing has meaning, until you choose to give it one. Few phrases in the history of philosophy have caused as much impact as this one. Hell is other people. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote these words in his play No Exit, Huis Clos, 1944, and they quickly broke out of the world of theatre to become a well-known existentialist quote. But what exactly did Sartre mean by that? Was he promoting selfishness? Was he saying we should avoid others to find peace? Not at all. In fact, this line is one of the strongest expressions of his philosophy about freedom, responsibility, and the gaze of others. Let's break it down. At the heart of Sartre's philosophy is the idea that human beings are radically free. There's no fixed essence that defines us before we exist. We aren't shaped by God, by a human nature, or by any set roles. We are who we choose to be. Every action, every decision, every gesture, they all build our identity. But there's a disturbing obstacle to that absolute freedom. Other people. Others see us from the outside. They form an image of us based on their impressions, judgments, and expectations. And often, that image doesn't match who we believe we are. Even worse, we start to see ourselves through their eyes. Sartre described this as a deeply uncomfortable experience. It's as if someone else's gaze freezes us, turns us into an object. Suddenly, we're no longer a free subject. We become what they see. That's what he means by hell is other people. Not because others are evil, but because they have the power to reduce us to a role, a label, a limited identity. Imagine something simple. You're in a meeting and someone calls you lazy. Even if it's not true, that word starts shaping how others see you. And slowly, you start acting differently, either to prove them wrong or to defend yourself. You're no longer just you. You've become what they expect of you, or worse. You're living to fight against or live up to an image someone else created. For Sartre, this is a kind of existential trap. The other person, with their judgment, invades your space of freedom, not through violence, but through expectations, labels, interpretations. This kind of prison is subtle. It shows up in relationships, at work, in families, and especially on social media. We're surrounded by gazes, and each one expects something from us. A mother expects obedience. A boss expects productivity. A friend expects loyalty. Society expects success, beauty, performance. And we often accept all of that without question. We turn into characters. We play roles. We act as if we are who others want us to be. And we stop living as authentic people. Sartre called this the objectification by otherness. In other words, the other person turns us into an object, and that strips us of the freedom to keep becoming who we truly are. Deep down, hell is other people, because they show us what we can't control, how we're seen. And from that comes discomfort, anxiety, and conflict. But Sartre isn't naive. He knows we can't live alone. Other people are part of the world. They're part of us. So the point isn't to eliminate others, but to understand the impact they have on our freedom. And even more, to realize that we do the same to them. We also reduce others. We judge them. We lock them into fixed identities in our minds. We live in a kind of distorted mirror. We're watched, and we watch. We're judged, and we judge. We become objects in other people's eyes, and we do the same to them. This constant tension between being a subject and being an object is what Sartre called an ontological conflict, a battle for our being. Each person tries to assert their freedom, but at the same time gets caught in the freedom of others to judge them. That's why so many human relationships are painful. We want to be understood, but no one can truly see inside us. We want to be accepted, but others project their own ideas onto us. So we defend ourselves. We hide. We put on masks. And in doing that, we lose our authenticity. That's the hell. Not other people themselves, but how we let ourselves be trapped by them. Sartre's answer isn't to push people away. It's to recognize what's going on, to understand that being seen is part of life, and we can't control how others see us. But we can take back control of our own choices. We can assert ourselves, even in the face of judgment. We can decide who we are, even when the world says we're someone else. We can look at others not as enemies, but as mirrors that reflect, not define. This mindset takes courage, authenticity, inner freedom, and above all, responsibility. Because if we feel like others are our hell when they limit us, we become someone else's hell when we reduce them. That's why Sartre's philosophy is a call to live with more awareness, to question the roles we've been assigned, to see others as others, not as mirrors for our own projections. In No Exit, the characters are trapped in a room with no mirrors. The only way they can see themselves is through the eyes of others, and what they find is judgment, discomfort, and confinement. That scene is a powerful metaphor. It shows what happens when we live only to meet others' expectations. We lose our freedom. We lose our peace. We lose ourselves. So the next time you feel judged, when you feel trapped in someone else's idea of you, remember this: hell is other people, but only if you let them be. The real challenge is to find freedom, even under someone else's gaze, and to say, with confidence, I am more than what you see. The word freedom carries both hope and anxiety. While everyone wants to be free, few people truly understand the philosophical depth behind this idea. Two thinkers stand out with sharply contrasting views: Immanuel Kant and Jean-Paul Sartre. Both placed freedom at the center of their philosophies, but they approached it in almost opposite ways. one based on universal reason, the other grounded in the raw experience of existence. For Kant, freedom is what makes morality possible. It isn't something we learn through experience or habit. It's transcendental, meaning it's a condition that must already be in place for moral action to exist. We are free because we have reason, and reason allows us to act not out of impulse, but out of duty. To be free for Kant is to act autonomously, according to principles we could will to become universal laws. Freedom is the foundation of human dignity, because it means we can follow a law we give to ourselves. This is the core of his categorical imperative. Act only according to that maxim by which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. In other words, true freedom means willingly submitting to moral reason. Kant's moral system is objective. There is a rational ethical truth that applies to all rational beings. This brings a kind of philosophical comfort. There's a foundation, a standard, a clear guide for making the right choices. The good is something we can reason through, and to be free is to act in line with it, even when it goes against our personal desires. Freedom isn't doing whatever we want. It's doing what we ought to do. And this duty comes from reason, not from emotion, culture, or faith. Kant believed this moral reason was shared by all, a bridge between people. Sartre, however, flips this foundation upside down. He starts from the idea that existence precedes essence, meaning that humans aren't born with a built-in purpose, identity, or nature. We exist first and only later become something, and that becoming depends on our choices. That's why Sartre says, man is condemned to be free. There's no escape from it. Freedom isn't just one option among many. It's our very way of being. Even when we avoid choosing or let others decide for us, we're still choosing. For Sartre, freedom isn't a moral strength. It's an existential burden. Unlike Kant, Sartre doesn't believe in a universal moral code. In a world without God, without essence, without a given purpose, the human being is completely responsible for creating their own values. And this creation isn't neutral. When I choose for myself, I'm also suggesting a model for what I think humanity should be. Every decision is, in some way, a statement about what kind of person everyone should be. That's why the responsibility is total. There are no excuses. We can't blame biology, culture, the past, or our circumstances. We are responsible for everything we do, and even for what we fail to do. This absolute responsibility makes Sartre's freedom an experience filled with anxiety. For Kant, freedom is a product of reason. For Sartre, it's exposure to the void. There are no objective standards to tell us what's right. There are no guarantees that we're making the right choices, and yet we're still forced to choose. That absence of external justification is what creates the existential angst. Freedom isn't a peaceful privilege. It's an open field where everything depends on us, including the meaning of life itself. Another key difference between Kant and Sartre is how they see other people. For Kant, other people are always ends in themselves. We should never use someone as a means to an end. This ethic of respect is the basis for human dignity in relationships. But for Sartre, other people often feel like a threat to our freedom. The gaze of the other defines us, pins us down, turns us into an object. We're reduced to an external image we can't control. In that moment, we feel like our freedom is being taken away, like we're no longer subjects, but things. For Sartre, the presence of the other brings conflict. I am free, but I'm also seen. And being seen can feel like being limited. Sartre rejects the idea that there's a shared rational structure connecting people. Each human is a unique project, a deep well of possibilities, constantly under construction. There's no guaranteed unity, no shared reason, no universal duty. There are only individuals thrown into the world, forced to decide, to fail, and to create. In this view, Freedom is a lonely experience, but that loneliness is also where authenticity is born. To choose is to exist with courage. While Kant hoped moral reason would lead us to peace and dignity, Sartre saw freedom as a battlefield, inside and out. Every choice reveals something about us, commits us to a path, and exposes us to judgment. There's nowhere to hide. Freedom pulls us away from excuses, systems, and certainty. It forces us to face what we are and what we are not. And even though that's a painful truth, it can also be deeply liberating. At the core, both philosophers speak to the greatness of freedom, but through opposite routes. For Kant, freedom makes us dignified. For Sartre, it makes us real. Kant gives us a map. Sartre gives us the raw land and the challenge to draw our own path. But in both views, freedom is what defines us, and maybe that's the most frightening and most human realization of all. We are free, and because of that, we have no one to blame but ourselves. Sartre didn't see freedom as a light or comforting gift. He saw it as a kind of sentence, an unescapable fact of our being. In his philosophy, human beings are thrown into the world with no built-in essence, no set path, no instruction manual. And that means one thing: we are completely left to our own freedom. The paradox is brutal. We are free, but we can't stop being free. Even when we choose not to choose, we are still choosing. There is no way out. This radical freedom is at the heart of Sartre's Existentialism. It's what defines our existence. There's no human nature telling us how to act, and no higher force guiding our decisions. Every step, every silence, every retreat or advance, it all starts with us. Freedom isn't something we have, like a tool. It's what we are. It's built into us. Even when we run from it, we're exercising it. Sartre famously said, "We are condemned to be free." He chose the word condemned on purpose. He knew how heavy it sounds, because unlike the usual idea of freedom as something that sets us free, Sartre's freedom is demanding. It doesn't comfort us. It doesn't give us peace. It demands things from us. It exposes us. Every human action is a choice, and every choice is a statement. This is what I want to be. This is what I believe in. But here's the dilemma. If we're condemned to be free, what happens when we don't want to choose? When we'd rather stay still, keep quiet, or remain neutral? Sartre's answer is clear. Even not choosing is a choice. Even silence has a direction. Waiting, procrastinating, letting life take its course, all of that is still deciding. Choosing not to choose is still choosing. And that leads to a deep kind of anxiety. There are no excuses, no escape. We can't blame our lives on fate, on the system, on how we were raised, on our parents, the government, or even God. We may try to, but deep down, we know it's us. We're the ones who hesitated, who didn't act, who gave in. Even when we just follow social norms or play a role, we're accepting those roles as if they were unavoidable, but they're not. That's where Sartre's powerful idea of bad faith comes in. Bad faith is when we lie to ourselves, when we pretend we're not free, that we don't have a choice. His classic example is the waiter who plays the role of the waiter too perfectly, with exaggerated movements, like he's just a waiter and nothing more. But he isn't a waiter in the same way a rock is a rock. He's being a waiter. He chose to be there, in that moment, living that way. Bad faith is how we try to escape the burden of freedom. It's the mask we wear to avoid facing the anxiety of having to decide all the time. But Sartre calls this out. He shows that there is no escape from choice. Even when we fake it, we're still choosing to fake it. And that act, pretending, is itself proof of freedom. What troubles us then isn't the lack of freedom, it's the excess of it. It's realizing that everything, absolutely everything, depends on us. That doesn't mean we can control everything. Far from it. A lot of things are beyond us. Death, time, tragedy, pain. But how we respond to those things, That's our choice. Even when we can't change the situation, we're still free to give it meaning, to act, to accept or resist. No one chooses to be born, but everyone chooses what to do with the life they were given. Even the smallest actions, getting out of bed, making coffee, looking out the window, are ways of saying something. Sartre pushes us to face that emptiness head-on. If there's no given meaning, no external purpose waiting for us, then we are the ones who have to create meaning. Freedom stops being a nice idea and becomes a personal project. And this project isn't comfortable because it means we have to take responsibility for everything. There's no one to praise us, no one to blame, no guarantees, just our own awareness and the knowledge that every choice shapes the world in our image. And that's also political, because when we choose, when we act a certain way, we're not just defining ourselves, we're projecting a vision of what it means to be human. Every action is a kind of universal statement. That's why there's no such thing as a neutral action, no choice without ethical consequences. Even our silence says something and reveals something. The paradox of freedom asks us to grow up, in an existential sense, to accept that there's nowhere to hide, that freedom is always there, even in what we think is just passivity. We're not spectators in our own stories. We're the writers. We're the ones who choose to stand up or stay seated, to speak or stay silent, to love or to pull away, to fight or to avoid. And every choice is a brushstroke on the painting of our life. In the end, what Sartre shows us is that freedom is so deep, so rooted in our being, that even when we want to escape it, we can't. We are free, even when we don't want to be, and that's scary. But it's also powerful, because it gives us the power and the responsibility to live with authenticity, to stop hiding behind masks, excuses and roles, to live with clarity, even when that clarity hurts. Sartre's paradox of freedom is a tough truth to face, but once you understand it, it can free you more deeply than any outside promise ever could. Because once you accept that you can't not choose, you start choosing with more awareness, with more courage, with more truth, and maybe that's all we need to turn the burden of freedom into a strength. Sartre's philosophy invites us to let go of the illusion that life comes with a pre-written script. There's no universal guidebook telling us who we're supposed to be. And more than that, there's no human essence that exists before we do. According to Sartre, human beings aren't born with a purpose. First and foremost, we are open-ended projects, unfinished, unstable, constantly evolving. This project, what Sartre calls the fundamental project, is our deepest answer to the question, who am I? But this answer doesn't come from outside. It isn't inherited, imposed, or written in the stars or tradition. It's born from the choices we make every day. Every gesture, every action, every small or big decision. It's all part of building an identity that's always in progress. The fundamental project defines us, but never traps us. It's a direction, not a cage. And that's where both the beauty and the weight of the idea lie. Because there's no model to follow. No absolute ideal telling us what it means to be a good human. We're the ones who build that ideal, and we build it through what we do, in practice, in action, in everyday life. But here's the thing, that doesn't mean anything goes. The fundamental project demands consistency. It's not just a random collection of acts, it's a kind of inner unity, like a story we're writing, where each decision needs to align with the bigger picture we're trying to create. When we betray that project by acting against our values, we feel anxiety, discomfort, and a sense that we're living a life that doesn't feel true to us. Sartre believed that man is nothing more than what he makes of himself. That simple line carries a heavy load of responsibility, because we can't blame outside factors, not society, not culture, not our parents or biology. Sure, all those things influence us, but none of them define who we are. We decide what to do with what life gives us. We choose whether we passively accept social roles or dare to question, reinvent, and transform them. And here comes one of the hardest truths about the fundamental project. It's never finished. It's never complete. There's no final period. Even when we think we've found ourselves, life changes, and we're asked to reinvent ourselves again. A loss, a crisis, a new phase. Any of these can make us rethink our direction. And that's okay, because to Sartre, the human being is not a finished product. We are a becoming. This idea is incredibly freeing. It breaks us out of the trap of having to be something fixed or final. We can change. We can rebuild ourselves. We can leave one path and start another. And that's not failure. That's freedom. The most creative and mature kind of freedom. The fundamental project allows us to stay true to ourselves, even when that truth requires transformation. But that freedom also comes with emotional weight. The fear of messing up. The fear of wasting our lives. The fear that at the end of it all, we'll look back and realize we built something that doesn't really reflect us. That fear is real, because the risk is real. There are no guarantees. No choice comes with a certificate of success. And that's why living authentically takes courage. The fundamental project isn't something we discover in a flash of inspiration. It's not some mystical calling. It reveals itself slowly, through experience, through trial and error, through our run-ins with the world. Often, we only realize who we want to be after living through who we don't want to be anymore. That's part of the process. Mistakes are part of the construction. Pain is part of the shaping. Sartre invites us to see life as a continuous commitment to freedom. Living isn't about following formulas. It's about creating meaning. And that meaning isn't out there, waiting to be found. It's in here, waiting to be created. The fundamental project is, at its core, a personal choice, but one that carries a universal weight. When I commit to what I believe in, I offer the world a vision of what it means to be human, a vision of freedom. And that's a deeply ethical point. The fundamental project is never just about me. It shows up in our relationships, our communities, our culture. Every time we live authentically, we contribute to a more conscious, more honest, more free humanity. And when we betray that project out of fear, conformity, or self-deception, we feel something inside begin to rot. It's the soul, so to speak, asking for coherence. That's why Sartre's philosophy isn't just cold theory, it's an existential wake-up call, a call to take responsibility. He doesn't just want us to think about freedom. He wants us to live as free beings, to take ownership of our existence with all its doubts, pains, and possibilities, to stop seeing ourselves as victims of life and start seeing ourselves as the authors of our path. This isn't about social success. The fundamental project isn't your job title, your reputation, or your accomplishments. It goes deeper than that. It's about staying true to who you are. It's living in a way that, even in silence, you know you didn't betray yourself, that you looked at life with honesty, that you made conscious choices, that you took the risk of being. And when doubt shows up, as it always will, take a breath. Come back to center. Ask yourself, what am I saying with the life I'm living? That one question can be the lighthouse guiding your fundamental project. Because in the end, the question isn't what the world expects from you. It's what you, with your freedom, are choosing to offer the world. In 1945, right after the end of World War II, Jean-Paul Sartre took the stage in Paris to deliver one of the most powerful philosophical talks of the 20th century. The title was bold and direct. Existentialism is a humanism. With that statement, Sartre wasn't just responding to the heavy criticism his philosophy had received. He was also making a kind of existentialist manifesto, aiming above all to restore the dignity of the human being in a world left in ruins. The timing was significant. Europe had been devastated by unspeakable horrors. People were searching for meaning, stability, something to believe in, and to many, existentialism seemed more like a poison than a cure. Critics accused it of promoting nihilism, moral relativism, and despair. They said that by denying the existence of God and human nature, Sartre was endorsing chaos, selfishness, and a total lack of morality. But Sartre's response was clear. No, existentialism doesn't destroy human values. It strengthens them. Existentialism, he argued, is the only philosophy that truly takes human beings seriously. Because when he says that existence precedes essence, Sartre means that each person is responsible for shaping their own identity, and that shaping is a deeply ethical act. Sartre didn't deny that freedom is overwhelming. He understood how heavy it is to live in a world with no instruction manual, no built-in purpose, no divine blueprint. But it's precisely within that emptiness that human greatness can emerge. To him, existentialism is a form of humanism because it puts the individual back in charge of their own story. No more excuses, no more fate, just choices, and the responsibility that comes with every choice. This was the heart of his lecture. Man is not defined by biology, culture, or upbringing. He is what he chooses to become. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself, Sartre said, emphasizing a radical idea of freedom and self-determination. And that freedom isn't isolated, it's tied to others. When I choose something, I'm saying, this is what I believe a human being should be. That means my actions carry universal weight. Sartre gave a striking example during the lecture. A young man torn between two moral duties. On one hand, he wants to stay home and care for his sick mother. On the other, he feels called to join the resistance against the Nazis. No moral code, no religious rule, no cultural tradition can decide for him. He's alone. He has to choose. And whatever he decides, it will be his responsibility. There is no right answer, only commitment to the path he chooses. This is where existentialism shows just how deeply human it is. It doesn't treat people like children who need comforting stories. It treats them like adults, free, anxious, responsible, capable of creating meaning even in a world that often seems senseless, capable of choosing who they want to be, and of changing the world around them through those choices. Sartre also pushed back against the claim that existentialism leads to selfishness. In fact, he said the opposite. Existentialism forces us to recognize others as just as free and responsible as we are. True freedom, when taken seriously, demands respect for the freedom of others. That's not selfishness, that's existential solidarity. It means realizing that our choices are never neutral. They shape the world for everyone. Another important part of the lecture was Sartre's critique of inherited values. He wasn't against values themselves, but against blindly accepting them. Existentialism challenges us to question everything, not out of rebellion, but out of honesty. A value only truly matters when it's consciously chosen and lived. Faith, ethics, courage, they're all valid, but not as hand-me-downs. They become real when we make them our own. In that sense, existentialism stands against both nihilism and conformity. It doesn't say anything goes. It says we are responsible for what we allow. It doesn't say life has no meaning. It says meaning is up to us. And that task isn't abstract. It shows up in our work, our relationships, our politics, our silences. Sartre's version of humanism is demanding. It doesn't offer comfort. It offers freedom. It doesn't promise guarantees. It gives us the chance to live truthfully. It sees each person as a project, something always being created through action. And even more, through that personal creation, we help shape what humanity itself becomes. That's what existentialist humanism is about. Not glorifying humans as divine or perfect, but recognizing real greatness in our freedom, fragility, and responsibility. At the end of the lecture, what remains is a challenge, a call, not to believe in ready-made answers, but to live with awareness, to take ownership of your life, to embrace the solitude of decision-making as the starting point for authenticity, to understand that there are no born heroes, only people who become heroic through the way they choose to live. Existentialism is a humanism, but not the feel-good kind from centuries past. It's a humanism that's tragic, brave, and honest. A philosophy that looks you in the eye and says, you are free. And because you are free, you are responsible. And that responsibility, even if it feels like a burden, is what makes us truly human. At first glance, freedom seems like an unquestionable value. Who wouldn't want to be free? Who doesn't want to live by their own will? No strings attached, no outside control, no burdens placed on their shoulders. And yet, human history tells a strange story. Whenever pure freedom shows up, many people back away. They choose to obey, to follow, to belong. But why? Jean-Paul Sartre helps us understand this paradox. For him, human beings are condemned to be free. That means we can't escape freedom. It's built into our very existence. We're free even when we try not to be. Even when we say, I didn't have a choice, we still chose. And that's exactly what scares us. Freedom, when fully embraced, isn't a world of hopeful possibilities. It's a void, a wide open space with no map, no guarantees, no ready-made idea of what a good life looks like. Freedom hands us the brush and the blank canvas, but then leaves us alone to figure out what to paint. What if we mess up? What if we waste it? What if, in the end, we realize we made the wrong choices? That's where the fear of freedom starts to grow, because with freedom comes total responsibility. You can't pass the blame. If life turns out wrong, if the path feels off, if regrets pile up, it's all on you. It's easier to believe, I had no choice, or it was fate, or that was just my karma. It's more comforting to act like life is already scripted, and we're just playing our role. That's why so many people trade autonomy for safety. Clear rules, social norms, religious traditions, preset roles. They all offer protection from the fear of having to decide for ourselves. If I follow an outside rule and fail, at least I didn't choose it. If I live by others' expectations, I might lose myself, but I avoid the terror of the unknown. Sartre called this bad faith, a kind of self-deception where we pretend we aren't free. It's when we act like we're just a role, just a job, just a label. Like the famous example Sartre gives, a waiter who plays the role of waiter so well that he forgets he's more than that. He's not just a function, he's freedom in action. But he hides behind the uniform to avoid the truth that everything, absolutely everything, is a choice. Existentialism forces us to face a hard truth. When we run from freedom, we're running from ourselves, from the only thing that gives life real meaning. Because we're only truly human when we choose, when we take ownership, when we accept responsibility. Authenticity only exists when freedom is lived, not denied. That's where existential anxiety comes in, the deep discomfort of realizing we're totally free. It hits when we understand, deep down, that nothing is forcing us to be who we are. There's no essence, no destiny, no God laying out our purpose. We're a project, constantly in progress, and we write that project with every choice we make. Anxiety, in this context, isn't a disorder, it's clarity. But it's understandable that most people want to avoid that kind of clarity. Freedom hurts. It takes maturity, courage, and a moral strength that isn't always encouraged. From a young age, we're trained to obey, to fit in, to follow the model. School teaches us answers, not questions. Society rewards success, not self-awareness. In this environment, freedom feels more like a burden than a gift. There's also a social side to this fear. Being free means standing out. It means risking judgment, rejection, or even isolation. Autonomy sets us apart from the crowd, and the crowd doesn't always welcome that. Choosing safety often means choosing belonging, and that has real weight. Freedom can make you feel alone, while obedience earns you a place in the group, even if that place costs you your soul. At its core, the fear of freedom is really the fear of living authentically. It's the fear of owning who we are and what we build with our lives. It's the fear of having no one to blame. But at the same time, it's also the doorway to the only life worth living, one that is truly chosen. Celebrating freedom only comes after facing the anxiety it brings. It comes when we realize that the lack of certainty is actually the soil where creativity grows. That emptiness can be filled with meaning. Not meaning we're given, but meaning we create. Autonomy, though it may be lonely, is what makes us the authors of our own existence. Sartre never claimed this was easy. In fact, it's the hardest path of all. But it's also the only one that allows us to live with integrity. When we choose with awareness, even when the choice is difficult, something inside us aligns. There's pain, but also truth. There's risk, but also freedom. And freedom, in the end, is what makes us human. Not perfect, not constantly happy, but free. And that alone, even with all the fear it brings, is a kind of miracle. If you've made it this far, it's because there's something inside you that's looking for more than easy answers. Maybe a deep desire to understand yourself, to find clarity in the middle of the chaos, or simply to walk through life with more awareness. Thank you, truly, for being part of this reflection. Your presence is what gives meaning to this space. If this content spoke to you in any way, give the video a like. It helps the channel reach more people who, just like you, are searching for meaning. Share it with someone who might need to hear these words. Sometimes, one idea is enough to change the direction of a life. Leave a comment down below. Which of these ideas resonated with you the most? What does freedom mean to you? I'd really love to hear from you. And of course, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There's still so much to explore. More philosophies, more thinkers, more ways to see the world with depth and courage. Stick around. The next video might be exactly what you've been looking for. See you soon.